It was a British man, Edwin Guthrie, a partner of the chartered accountancy firm of Thomas, Wade and Guthrie of London, who helped establish the AICPA. Guthrie took a trip to New York in October of 1886 to take care of problems resulting from the unexpected death of his firm's New York partner. However, an unscrupulous member of the firm had taken possession of the office and defeated Guthrie's efforts to reorganize the firm's practice. It wasn't until January 1887 that the courts allowed Guthrie to repossess his firm's office. This difficult episode motivated Guthrie to encourage American accountants to form a professional organization that could attest to its members' competency and integrity. Thus, the American Association of Public Accountants was formed, the direct lineal ancestor of the modern AICPA. The early 1900s was the beginning of the regulation of public accounting, and Utah was in the forefront. William J. Bateman and Douglas A. Swan Sr. were chiefly responsible for the passage of the Utah State Public Accountancy Law of 1907. At that time, only 9 other states had laws regulating the practice of public accounting. Mr. Bateman was appointed to the first Utah Board of Accountancy and served as chairman until the State Department of Registration was created by the legislature in 1921. The first CPA examination in Utah was given in 1908 to 3 candidates. 2 passed, a much higher percentage than today. By comparison, just under 40% of Utah candidates passed the May 1994 exam on the first sitting. In 1909, the corporation excise tax was enacted, imposing a 1% tax on all corporate income in excess of $5,000, thus creating a need for the first tax accountant. In 1917, the American Institute of Accountants offered the first uniform CPA exam and adopted its first code of ethics.
In 1928, Amelia Earhart became the first woman to fly non-stop across the Atlantic, but not the first person. Charles A. Lindbergh had accomplished the feat the year before. In one of the most daring and dramatic events in history, Lucky Lindy set down his single-engine Spirit of St. Louis on Francis Bouget Field.
The years from 1915 to 1925 were dubbed as the decade of the CPA movement. The charter members of the UACPA met on July 8, 1920, at the Commercial Club to establish the Utah Association of Public Accountants, which later became the UACPA, and adopted a constitution and bylaws. The objectives of the association were to raise the standard of public accountancy as a profession, to advance and safeguard the interest and members of the association, and to promote harmony and cordiality among them. As I can remember going back into Dad's office and they're finding large handwritten journals and ledgers on shelves. I can remember seeing green linoleum on desks and to keep them from being marred. Green typewriter ribbon was used, where every report that went out was in a fancy green. It kind of got to be Dad's motif or his symbol. Whereas today we go into a CPA firm and you almost don't even see an adding machine. You see computers on everybody's desk. Needless to say, after the stock market crash of 1929, there was an increased effort to structure and regulate the conduct of the members. The current Code of Professional Conduct has been amended several times over the years and has been adopted by the UACPA and the state as the rules of professional conduct of the association. Hopefully, nothing as devastating worldwide as the Depression will ever happen again. You know, it was interesting. After the stock market crashed back in 1929, Dad was just graduating from college and just getting ready to get married. And the jobs were just scarce. And so he would leave home every morning and tell the family he was going to work. And then he would go search for work. This would happen not only day in, day out, but month in and month out. And finally he went into Eastman Kodak Company, and they said that they'd be glad to have him come in and do their accounting. They give him a desk, but they just couldn't pay him at that time. And so Dad worked for them for over 6 months without any pay, and finally they came in and said that they would like to give him a camera for his good service, and then they'd start him at $5 a week. And that was, to him, all the money in the world. Those were rather difficult times.
let me assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
Everybody was enthused after we had the first meeting, and I was the second president of the organization.
What I remember most about Irv Fox were the times he had with my parents. They were in our home oftentimes for meals and thoroughly enjoyed being together. But I remember his integrity and the high respect that everyone seemed to have for Irv Fox.
I knew CPAs all over, and I believe I had as much to do with as anyone in getting a regional meeting started. My job was with Internal Revenue, and I became head of Internal Revenue here and then in Washington. I don't advertise that very much. I mean, it isn't a subject that people like to hear about, I don't think.
Upon retiring from that, he returned to Utah and went with the Utah state government. And there he helped bring computers into the highway department as well into the Utah State Tax Commission.
Dann löst das in Deutschland nur ein schallendes Gelächter aus.
The 40s started with economic depression, war raging in Europe, and I was there swatting flies. The firm that I was with did a lot of governmental accounting. A lot of it was in the rural areas. I learned very early that one of the best things to take with you was a fly swatter. We would sit there and audit with a pencil in one hand and a fly swatter in the other hand. About that time, the Ladies' Auxiliary was formed by wives of CPAs, so we could have functions such as charity luncheons, fashion shows, helping the UACPA find its softer side. One of the biggest problems we had during World War II was manpower and rationing. We, fellows when they were coming out of college usually went into the service or tried to get into a defense industry, but so that also affected our clients. Gas rationing was a very important part of. We had in the firm I was with at that time, we combined all of our gas into one car so that we could have something to travel around with. Also found it necessary to use public transportation, and when we did that, where we could usually drive, like say to Provo and back in a day, we'd go down and have to spend the week down there because there wasn't sufficient gas to keep us going. Yeah, I'll never forget where I was on VE Day because we were working in Paiute County, and there's no place to stay in Paiute County. In fact, there's no place to eat there at the junction. And so we were staying in Richfield, and we left there that morning and went over to work, and sometimes we'd go across the street to the gas station and get some crackers and cheese, and then come back, go to work, and then figure we could get a good meal when we got back to Richfield that night. And that happened to be VE Day, and we didn't even know about it. But when we reached Richfield, the place was closed. Everything, gas stations, delicatessen, anything. Everything was closed, and we had to go to bed hungry that night.
We hold all continents and peoples in equal regard and honor. We reject any insinuation that one race or another, one people or another, is in any sense inferior or expendable.
The 1950s were the Wonder Bread years with new prosperity, and for the first time films were distributed so college students could learn more about accounting and consider it as a career.
My advice to anyone considering accounting as a major or a career is that they take a class or have an internship in it so that they can see for themselves what accounting is all about.
Accounting, huh? Who would have guessed? So what do you want to do for the rest of your life?
Chloe Wangsgard was appointed Executive Secretary in 1954. Public relations programs were initiated to promote the profession and help the average listener with tax problems. UACPA members answered questions on KSL Public Pulse and KUED. 1959 was also a time for celebration. Percy Goddard, one of our founding fathers, was honored for 50 years of service and recognized as Dean of the Utah CPAs. In those days, J. Percy Goddard, who was the chairman of the examining committee, if you got a call on the phone and the sweetest words you'd ever hear out of J. Percy was, "Congratulations, you passed the CPA exam." The UACPA also kept up with the times. We increased the dues. There was a special $3 assessment to the membership for the cost of engraving the CPA directory.
First, to halt this offensive buildup, a strict quarantine on all offensive military equipment under shipment to Cuba is being initiated.
In the 60s, things were really quite exciting. It took more time to keep up and to feel good about the product that you were turning out. And as a result, the number of courses that we taught increased. To begin with, the only courses we had was maybe a lecture at the monthly meeting. And after that, it turned into half-day classes and full-day classes and 2 or 3 day seminars. We began a scholarship program to help junior accounting students attending universities in Utah to achieve their bachelor's degree. For the first time, new certificate holders were sent letters congratulating them on completing the exam and inviting them to join the UACPA. At the time I was executive secretary, I was a one-man organization, if you please, and I worried about the professional development courses, the tax manual program that we had, and literally everything else. To begin with, I was paid $25 a month and $2 for each enrollee in one of our courses. The 60s were years of change. There was also a change in dues. They went up again. The initiation fee at that time was a staggering $10.
While I was in Florida trying to get a few days' rest after my visit to Moscow, I first learned from news reports of the Watergate break-in.
While some fought in Vietnam and some demonstrated against the war, the UACPA continued to grow. The UACPA moved its new offices to the Judge Building. The office furniture was donated by Touche Ross. The Tax Symposium Conference was started and has improved and prospered with each passing year. The Becker CPA Review course was established in the Salt Lake area to help candidates prepare for the CPA exam. Francie Whitehead, oh, she was very vivacious and a real leader and enthusiasm, bundle of energy. And she really, as first executive secretary on a full-time basis, really improved our program and was able to do a lot of things that as part-time people we were not able to do. The U of U Department of Accounting announced its professional program in accountancy. This led to the Master of Professional Accountancy degree. The annual conventions in the mid-70s to the mid-80s were also grand social events. We went to Hawaii and very much enjoyed it. It was held on the island of Maui, and I particularly enjoyed the one we had at Lake Tahoe because we had a speaker on how the gambling saloons kept control of their winnings in their machines and things like that that I thought was just absolutely fascinating from a technical standpoint. Oh, and of course the dues went up, $15 per year in most categories.
5, we have main engine start. 4, 3, 2, 1, SRV ignition and liftoff. The 1980s was the decade of the woman CPA. Pam Peterson, who was actually the third woman CPA, I think, that was hired at our firm, and Pam and I were both expecting a baby, and we went out together and called on a client, and everything went just fine, but I'm sure that the client was very surprised to see two expectant mothers entering their office with briefcases, but it worked out just great. Sue Higginson and Ellen Morrell formed the first female CPA firm. This was only 40 years after Mary T. Washington Wiley, the first black woman CPA in America, opened her own firm in her basement due to a lack of opportunity of work elsewhere. The first female was elected as UACPA president, Miss Lynn Wilhelmsen, and this was almost 90 years after Christine Ross became the first woman CPA and received her certificate in 1899, and 60 years after Claire Haynes, the UACPA's first female member, was admitted in 1923. Our own Larzette Hale was one of the first black women in the country to become a CPA and joined the Utah Association in 1975. Women have always been affiliated with the UACPA through the Ladies Auxiliary, but now they became an integral part as members and leaders. Historically, the Ladies Auxiliary had organized the social and charitable activities of the association. When the Ladies Auxiliary was disbanded in 1982, these activities didn't cease. If anything, there were more. The UACPA Open Golf Tournament was held at Wasatch State Park. They used to have a golf tournament at the firm Janice and I worked for, and the first year that I was there, and it was before Janice came, they had all the male members of the staff were all invited to come, and I wasn't, and so I went to the management and let them know. I mean, wondered why I wasn't invited to come too, and so they invited me to come, and I went. And I think that some of those things kind of helped for people in the future to just have them not exclude you from just the, the normal professional activities of the firm, but let you be a part of what's going on in the firm and include you. The first major PR campaign began. Ask a CPA and be sure. Tax Track's 5K run in City Creek Canyon was held. Blood pressure checks were held at the ZCMI Center on April 14th. The first UACPA Briefcase Brigade also marched in the St. Patrick's Day Parade and tied for first place. During the 1980s, it was decided that CPAs needed more than a bachelor's degree to participate in our chosen profession. The Public Accountants Licensing Act was passed, and CPE became a requirement for licensure. As a result of this, the UACPA named Jeannie Patton as Executive Director and Donna Salter as CPE Coordinator. This allowed the UACPA to give its members more services than ever before and double its membership in 5 years. In 1987, the Quality Review Program was born. Members voted on the AICPA plan to restructure, which in turn revised the Code of Ethics and required CPE for both practicing and non-practicing members. Oh, and of course, in the 1980s, the dues increased. For example, a member who just received their license was charged the low fee of $105. But in 1982, we also introduced the CPE Season Discount Program, which saved the average CPA enough to pay for their dues.
Operation Desert Storm began with air attacks on a scale not seen since the Second World War.
The UACPA in the 1990s is still growing, with over 2,000 members today. Today we have more members outside of public practice than ever before. Of our membership, more than half of our members are not practicing public accounting. They're in industry, they work for different companies, they work for the government, they work for private institutions, for nonprofit institutions. They don't hang out a shingle and do tax work for people. The Education Center has been a really great asset for the Utah Association. We opened it several years ago because we saw the need to have small group study sessions We saw the need for small classes for just a few people and for committee meetings where they had just a little bit more room to work in. Now, we didn't have that before. The first Utah Educators Conference was held at the University of Utah. It's been a great opportunity for the educators who are members of the Utah Association and those that aren't members of the Utah Association to get together, share ideas, learn what accounting changes are happening, learn what new accountants need to make themselves ready to go into business. The members of the UACPA today owe a real debt of gratitude to the ones that laid the foundation for us. They set a good standard, they set good rules, they made good procedures, and they made great decisions. We really appreciate the foundation they laid, because if it wasn't for what they did in the past, we wouldn't be where we are today. And so we're grateful to them, and it's good that we've had the chance in this video to tell a little bit about the work they did, because most of us don't know the sacrifices that were made in the past for us today. So we really appreciate that. And with that foundation can take us into the future. We've talked about how different CPAs are and how they all have different skills and they all have different jobs. And the only thing they do have in common is honesty, reliability, and independence. And that's what the UACPA is for, to keep them independent, to give them a voice, to bind CPAs together so that they can see that the public is protected. There aren't very many places you can go today to get someone who can independently watch out for you, who isn't worried about selling you something or isn't worried about trying to make a buck off of you. And that's the role that CPAs play. They're the honesty brokers, the analyzers, they're the binding that brings business together. And the UACPA plays a major role in seeing that we fulfill that responsibility.